group looking down on the other group because of what they deemed to be the standard. Interestingly, we'll get to that point in a moment. So this is what's going on. And listen to what Paul says. He says, okay guys, you who are Jews, this is what you're boasting about. You rely on the law and you boast in God. You claim to be superior because you have the law. There's a sense that you are convinced that you are a guide for the blind. I'm making a difference here. I'm really doing this for the world. A light to those who are in dark. You're an instructor. You have all of these claims that you say that you're fulfilling. But actually, Paul is about to pop their moral balloon, moral superiority balloon. He's going to deflate very quickly. Because what does he say? You then who teach others, do you teach yourself? You who preach against stealing, are you stealing? See, this is what happens. Those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. If we're judging others according to certain moral behaviors, there's an onus to say, hang on, folks. Am I living up to the truth? Is there truth and grace in my life, or am I just coming from a moral position of superiority? That's what he's challenging. You who say that people should not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? Well, I had a need, or whatever it was. There's a rationalization that goes on. And so what he comes to is a statement at the end, as it is written, God's name is blasphemed. God's name is ridiculed among the Gentiles because of you. That would have been a huge ouch. Because God's plan in the Old Testament was not just to keep it within Israel. Israel were called to be a light to the nations. That was their calling. And in fact, because of their failure, one had to come who truly was the light to the nations. And that is Jesus. And so Paul's saying, guys, I'm just going to bring you down a couple of pegs because you're on the same level here. You get that? That's where he's coming from. Let's talk about circumcision. I thought this was an appropriate picture to put up. It actually comes from an article that was written in a newspaper in the States, and I thought it was a helpful way of describing the process. Now, we don't talk a lot about circumcision. I don't think that's been a hot topic in the churches of recent times, but it's important to understand the context here because the Jews held to circumcision as a physical sign of the covenant that they had made before God. And it started firstly with Abraham. Abraham and his descendants, it was a symbol, it was a physical sign of an inward heart relationship. Does that make sense? Now, some of us might not have much quid with this in terms of that, we're thankful that it's an ancient practice possibly. But this was the deal, and they had a pride in this, that see, we are different, we are set apart. There is an outward symbol of our status. And Paul is saying, and in fact, it got to the point that even Jewish Christians were so committed to this practice that when Gentiles became Christians, they said, hey guys, line up. We've got a special, hey, welcome to the church. We've got a little special initiation process for you. And I'm sure some people coming in, oh, what's that? Oh, I'm not coming here. Because that's what they wanted to do. And the whole New Testament and Paul and the apostles said this, no way. We are not going to put the cultural expectations that were Israel's as part of their unique covenant onto the Gentiles, that somehow they have to now perform and meet some exterior kind of criteria to be in part of the family. That's not the deal. Aren't you pleased about that? Roses are red, violets are bluish. If it wasn't for Jesus, we'd all have to be Jewish. That's exactly what they were saying. Now, I'm all for Jews, don't worry, and their unique status before God, and I still believe there's a blessing upon the nation of Israel because of the covenant of the prophets, of Abraham. But that doesn't give them a free pass. And so this is a challenge. And so then he turns it on his head and said, imagine this, you guys who have the law and the outward experience, sign of circumcision, imagine that you don't keep the law. You've got all the outward signs, but you don't keep it inwardly. Imagine there's a Gentile, and they don't have the law and they don't have the outward signs, but inwardly they're in right standing with God. And it's most likely Paul's talking about Gentile Christians who'd come to faith through Jesus, because it's Jesus plus nothing else. It's Jesus alone is the basis of faith. Listen what he says. Circumcision has value if you observe the law. But if you break the law, you have become as though you had not been circumcised. So then, if those who are not circumcised keep the law's requirements, will they not be regarded as though they were circumcised? So they may not have the outward sign, but actually it's circumcision of the heart that God is looking to. The cutting away of the flesh of the old nature, of being set apart as God's people. And so this is a radical thing. Now, my daughter is a radiographer. That means she takes x-rays of people. And this is kind of on her side of x-ray team, tech. It's what's on the inside that counts. Do you get that one? Okay. You're looking into bodies, right? And we could say that that's what actually is the issue here with God. It's not what's on the outward. It's actually what's on the inside that counts. It's what's in our hearts. And Paul's radical new definition, defining that God's true people are not just people with a history or with recipients of the law, but it's actually God's new community. He talks about in other parts, God's new humanity. We all come together and we all become part of this community of faith. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean we've overtaken all the promises of the Old Testament. I do believe that there is still an outworking of God's covenant with Abraham and his descendants. But actually the ultimate fulfillment of the promise to Abraham was that Abraham's seed would be a blessing to the nations, and that is ultimately fulfilled in Jesus. He is the seed of Abraham who has brought the blessing of God to the nations. And we await and pray for the awakening of the Jewish people to the truth of the Messiah. Let me just finish up this morning by just making this comment. It's really interesting as we read the Gospels that Jesus seemed to show people who were broken and were the outcasts of society, he seems to show them grace and inclusion. He wore a badge that people tried to say was a judgment on him. He's the friend of sinners and tax collectors. I think Jesus wore that as a badge. You're absolutely right. I am, because they're the people that are open. You know, physician, heal yourself. The fact is these people realize they need a physician. They need healing. But Jesus reserved his greatest criticism actually for the evangelical leaders of the church, of the community in that day, known as the Pharisees. And one of the words Jesus used a lot was the word hypocrite, which literally means two-faced. So like remember in the acting world, you can often see two masks, the happy mask and the sad mask. And that's what Jesus was saying the Pharisees are like. They wear two masks. They wear a mask that keeps them from disconnected from God, but they wear a mask on the outside as though they are important before others. Jesus saw through their religious activity and their performance, and he said that is not what God is requiring. They've gone to performance and legalism, and he reserved some of his greatest criticism. Do you want to read Matthew 23, his commentary on the Pharisees? It is scathing. Why? Why did Jesus do that? Because these are supposed to be the good guys. They believed in the Old Testament. They were trying to follow the law. But unfortunately, like even many Christians today, we take what is truth and grace and we focus only on truth to the point of legalism, to the point of making superior judgments against others. Jesus came embodying grace and truth. When we just give truth a focus, we end up putting ourselves on a moral platform, and that is a dangerous place to be. So I want to wrap up my message this morning by coming back to look at these two little phrases. The ground is level at the foot of the cross, and people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Ken, can I just invite you to come and just begin to play in the background for a few moments? What I'd like us to do this morning is what I call ponder and apply. Ponder and apply.